everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to Reading in the Dark. My name is Byron and I read sometimes, and I'm eating chocolate because it is 9:30 at night and I'm about to leave to go to Halloween Horror Nights because it's open till 2, but I needed a nap after work, so I'm just now getting situated and thinking about going. But before that, I wanted to film a little video and talk to you about all of the books that I read in September. So this is going to be my September wrap-up. It's going to be an exciting video because I read a lot of books in September. I actually read the books that I said I was going to read, and that doesn't always happen. In fact, I read one more book this last month than I even had planned on reading, and loved it. So I was like, I have to make a wrap-up so that I can celebrate this moment. So let's dive in and talk about all damn books. So in the month of September, I read 1,204 pages and listened to and finished a 22-hour audiobook, a book that is 744 pages on paper. So that's a really good month for me, and I read everything I wanted to read, which is exciting. This is all pretty much thrillers and mostly horror. So the first book that I finished that I'm going to talk about in this video, I actually did not finish in September. I finished it in late August, and that is Model Home by Rivers Solomon. Now, I have read one other book by Rivers Solomon. It was Sorrowland, and it challenged me because I'd never really read horror before. At that point, I was starting to wade my way into the murky waters and was slowly figuring out that there's usually a supernatural element to horror stories that comes in partway through that I wasn't expecting. And so I felt like there was a genre shift, but in fact, I was just inexperienced with horror. So I really liked Sorrowland, though, and I loved the writing. And I enjoyed all of the supernatural elements to the story. I just wasn't expecting them for some reason. So I was really looking forward to reading Rivers Solomon again. They are amazing. And when this book was announced and the cover was announced and was coming out, it seemed like people were really excited about it. And then I feel like it was polarizing, and now I think I know why. The three Maxwell siblings keep their distance from the lily-white gated enclave outside Dallas where they grew up. When their family moved there, they were the only black family in the neighborhood. The neighbors acted nice enough, but right away, bad things, scary things, the strange and the unexplainable began to happen in the house. As adults, the siblings could finally get away from the horrors of home, leaving their parents all alone in the house. But when news of their parents' death arrives, Esri is forced to return to Texas with their sisters, Eve and Emmanuel, to reckon with their families past and present and to find out what happened while they were away. It was not a natural death for their parents, but was it supernatural? So you've got a family full of siblings in a black family. One of them is non-binary. They're raising a child. There was a lot of really great queer rep in the book. I really enjoyed the tumultuous relationship between the siblings, dealing with the death of their parents, and all of them having been traumatized by the events that happened in the house they grew up in, that they all believe is haunted in some way. There is a sense amongst all of them that the house killed their parents. It's really interesting. And what I wrote in my review is how much I enjoy, this is going to make me sound like a weirdo, enjoy reading intelligent, adult, successful, rational people who are spiraling into self-destructive behavior. I find something really interesting about reading that. Not because I like to see people hurting themselves, but because there's something in the fall that is very humanizing. And I would say that Esri is definitely engaging in some self-destructive behaviors, taking part in hookup culture, not always being the most responsible parent in the world, and leaving in the middle of the night for a hookup. They're going through a lot. It's just a really interesting time in this character's life, and their behavior is a little bit chaotic. One of the siblings is like an influencer and has a big following online and is sort of sensationalizing what happened to their parents, and her siblings are pissed at her for that. Reminiscent of The Haunting of Hill House, the TV show, not the book. And there's a lot going on there that is really interesting to digest. And then as they dive into what happened to their parents and try to figure it out, they start to uncover through various means a lot more information about what was actually happening in the house when they lived there. And the reveal towards the end sheds some very interesting light on the death of their parents. And it also sheds very, very interesting light on all of the mysterious and spooky goings-on that happened in the house when they were young. And I think that the ending is very polarizing, but I don't know how you can surprise a readership or surprise an audience creating an explanation at the end of a story that is going to please everybody. I don't think it's possible to do that. So I personally really like the reveal of this book. Yeah, I don't really have anything negative to say about this book. Generally speaking, if I really, really like a book, I will give it 3 or 4 stars. I'll give it 4 stars, but I only give a book 5 stars when there's just some other special element that makes the book like specifically amazing for me. This book didn't do that, but this book didn't really do anything wrong either. So it's 4 stars for me. I really enjoyed it, and that is Model Home by River Solomon. The funny thing about this TBR is there was nothing under a 4-star read in the month of September for me. Yeah, and if you've read it, say something in the comments about how you felt about the ending without spoiling it, because I'm curious what you think. The next book that I finished reading on September 10th, and is a book that has been on my list for a long time, and that is 40 Acres by Dwayne Alexander Smith. The setup for this novel is pretty wild. Martin Gray, a smart, talented black lawyer working out of a storefront in Queens, becomes friendly with a group of some of the most powerful, wealthy, and esteemed black men in America. They invite him for a weekend away from it all. No wives, no cell phones, no talk of business. But far from home and cut off from everyone he loves, he discovers a disturbing secret. His glittering new friends are part of a secret society dedicated to the preservation of the institution of slavery. But this time around, the black men are called master. Joining them seems to guarantee a future without limits. Rebuking them almost certainly guarantees his death. He has to decide what to do. So this book was crazy. Rincey from Rincey Reads said, damn, that was crazy. And I agree. It's hard to say anything other than, damn, that's crazy when you read that setup. But I really enjoyed this book. So in theory, the idea of someone operating a secret plantation where there's slavery going on, maybe it seems so on the nose, and that's why it seems over the top at first. But the more I read the novel, and the more I thought about the power that people with great sums of money have, we know what money can do and keep quiet in this country. And I started thinking, like, if somebody who was a billionaire joined forces with other billionaires and wanted to run this experiment, or whatever you want to call it, it wouldn't shock me if they were able to get away with it, at least for a time. And the depiction of that was tough to read. But the author, Dwayne Alexander Smith, actually makes this, at first blush, sort of seemingly crazy over-the-top premise kind of feel plausible, and that's really impressive. It was also really, really horrifying. We don't get to know the enslaved people at 40 Acres super well, because they're all afraid to talk. But there's this really, really interesting thing in this book. The whole facility is run by this fictional Dr. Kasim. And his whole sort of like ministry, if you will, centers around the concept of what he calls black noise, which is essentially this feeling that has been generationally pounded into the minds and souls and just like everyday thoughts of black people over generations and generations, that they deserve to be in a lower standing than whites, that they deserve to be in a subservient position, that they should not succeed. A person from a marginalized group internalizing a sense of their own inferiority to a more dominant group, one that has benefited from an unjustly elevated place in society for generations. So there's so much validity to that argument. He had a very specific experience that caused him to think that he needed to enslave this white man, and he got away with it, and he became very successful and has all this money. So his idea is that by enslaving white people at 40 Acres, it is a way of training out the black noise. And it feels like a righting of the balance. And of course, making that turn, that moral decision is unconscionable. But his philosophy underlying it all makes a lot of sense. And his psychology makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a hell of a heavy lift and an amazingly impressive accomplishment for an author. His motivation seems real, and I can buy that he means it and feels it. That's just good. I mean, that's some good writing. And I guess you could maybe make the argument that the men in this group are too unilaterally hateable, because not only are they taking part in this slavery situation, but they also are such misogynist pigs. Don't want their wives involved, their wives don't know about it, there's all kinds of infidelity going on. But I think you probably have to be a garbage person to take part in this kind of thing anyway, so maybe that makes sense. So it read like a really, really interesting exploration of the difference between justice and revenge. The one question I have: is it realistic that he is absolutely immediately revolted by it? Would it be interesting maybe if he has the crisis of considering it more than he does? I don't know. Maybe it would make it impossible to like that character. Anyway, I really enjoyed this book. It was a fast read. It was a crazy, fascinating idea that is somehow really brilliantly executed so that it feels plausible. It was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. I recommend it. I think it's an interesting, thought-provoking book to read and also enjoy in the form of a thriller. And yeah, I gave it 4 stars. Now, I'm going to talk about the audiobook, The Fireman by Joe Hill. I listened to this audiobook. It was about 22 hours long. It was narrated by Kate Mulgrew. And this is a dystopian novel about the onset of this disease, which really is an infection by a spore, Draco-Incendia trichophyton. It is a spore that infects you and you start to grow these really beautiful swirls of black sort of ashiness on you. And when you get tense or worried or nervous or ill or stressed, you can start to actually burn alive from the inside, and like you smoke is coming out of your mouth and stuff, and people eventually burst into flames and it kills them. It's spreading all over the world and people are dying in massive numbers, and it's like a die-off event. Anyway, so we follow Harper, who is a nurse at a school, and her shitty husband, Jacob, spelled with a K, but mostly Harper, as she navigates this ever-changing landscape of a dystopian world. And she joins this community at this, what used to be a summer camp, that has figured out a way to live with what is called dragon scale and control it so that they don't burst into flames. There are also some people who have learned to control the spore in so far that they're able to actually do magical fire effects and like shoot fireballs out of their hands. And the novel is named The Fireman because of this character that community refers to as, quote, the Fireman. His name is actually John, and he is the first person we meet in the story who has learned how to control the spore so that he can use it as a weapon and to protect and defend himself. That obviously becomes very useful in fighting off the attacks of horrible normal people, cremation squads that are going around. And of course there is a power struggle within this community and a weird religious cult-like thing that starts to happen and build up. And it's sort of a familiar trope of somebody who has power starting to enjoy it a little bit too much. And then there's a power vacuum, and then that person rises to the occasion and has followers. So it's one of those dystopian epics that, like, there's like this part of the book, then there's this part of the book, and then there's that part of the book. I really enjoyed this book. It was a great audiobook. Kate Mulgrew did an amazing job as always. This was written or published in 2016. I would say the most frustrating and also I would say triggering aspect of this story is the fearful ignorance of people. You know, some people are trying to study this thing and actually figure out how it works. And a lot of people just don't want to hear it because they want to protect their families. And so they remain ignorant and they don't listen, which is obviously something that we've all been through. It was a really interesting dystopia. The action sequences were really fun. The bad guys were really bad. And I'm just glad that I was able to enjoy yet another dystopian novel, because for the longest time, dystopian novels and me were not friends. So yeah, so I really enjoyed The Fireman. And it did not feel like a slog. It was a long book, but I just listened to it in the car every day to and from wherever I was going, and had a great time. I can still feel the atmosphere of being inside that world and in that book, and it did the thing where once you get to the end and things are sort of settled, you still kind of want to know what's going to happen to them next. And so I think it's a sign of good writing. But I really, really, really enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 stars. Okay, Voice Like a Hyacinth by Mallory Pearson. This is your sapphic, witchy, coming-of-age, dark academia fever dream that you should read because I loved it so much. I don't remember how this book came to me. It has a beautiful cover. I know that. Maybe it caught my eye. But boy, oh boy, I loved this book. I'll tell you right now, it was a 5-star read for me. Art student Jo Kozak and her fellow classmates and best friends, Caroline, Finch, Amrita, and Saz, are one another's muses, so close that they have their own language, and are so devoted to the craft that they'll do anything to keep their inspiration alive, even if it means naively resorting to the occult to unlock their creativity and to curse their esteemed, if notoriously creepy, professor. It is about artists at school, you know, nurturing their craft and their skill, and, you know, growing up and getting to know themselves and learning things about themselves, and also witchiness. So one of my favorite books of all time was A Separate Piece by John Knowles. And it's not really dark academia, but it's almost adjacent because it follows these young men in college, and it's just such a heady time, and you're figuring out who you are, and you're figuring out who you're going to be and what you're going to do, and trying to impress one another and trying to grow into yourself. There's just so much on the line during those years. I feel like it's such a fascinating setting to place a character in. So this book had that, which of course was one of the reasons that I loved it so much. But it also is about artists, right? They're all painters. And I went to school for theater. So I understand very, very well how intense it is when your everyday goal is to do the best you can with what you're being taught and funnel that into your art and your craft, and you're presenting it every day for the approval of your professors and your peers, and it feels very, very personal. And if it goes well, you take that personally, and if it goes poorly, you take that personally, and it feels like an attack on you if your performance is bad or if your painting does not inspire anybody. And especially when you're an actor, it's like you are the canvas, so maybe it's even more complicated. But that caused me to really, really relate to the sort of heightened emotions and like feverish intensity that these young women were, with which they were attacking their work. So they're basically all vying for a spot in the show at the end of the year, and there's going to be one solo artist featured, and then everybody else will get to show like 3 paintings, I think. And so as the year is progressing, they know that they're best friends and they've had this close-knit thing going on, and all but one of them managed to get assigned to live in this place called the Manor. That's just like this really sought after, beautiful old house on campus that's like one of the on-campus housing options. So they're all still really close together, but they're going to be competing against one another. And it's just, it really like hit home for me. So I loved that. And yeah, it's just the coming of age story set in an academic setting really does it for me. And yeah, there's an undertone of sexuality. There's a lot of queer stuff going on. Romance, maybe. And they really, truly love one another. And sometimes it's physical in a platonic way, and sometimes maybe it's physical in a slightly more sexual way. And there's lots of cuddling and lots of confused feelings amongst all of them, because they're just this like nest. And exactly what their relationship is to one another at any given moment seems like it's constantly sort of in flux. And that's really beautiful and really, really fun to read. So I loved that. And I loved the fact that it was a tight-knit group of queer, pretty much like across the board bisexual women. But also, like, so the witchiness. One of them just looks up a, kind of as a joke on a whim, a ritual where they can take this one professor who's a creep and is like inappropriate and is like a problem, and they like make an effigy of him and like curse him essentially, and like by taking his life force that's going to imbue all of their art, their creativity with like vigor and make them better than they've ever been, and it works. And then of course Joe ends up being sort of like haunted by the image of this, because I think Joe and Caroline are the two that really take part in this ritual more earnestly than the others. The others kind of like, okay, that was crazy and fun, let's go, and leave to the car, and those two kind of stay behind and like take it a step further with what they say, and they kind of have a moment where they become a little bit more sincere in the ritual, and so it affects the two of them more intensely. And it is nightmarish, the unsettling moments that Joe goes through as she's being haunted and chased, where like you read something on the page and it just like jumps out at you and is really unsettling. It just really, really worked like gangbusters for me. And I just love that they were there to create art and beautiful things, and they were like being really serious about their work and their art and growing themselves as artists, but also there's this like danger looming in the distance and just like just beneath the surface at all times. It was great. The tension was always really high. And I could not put this book down. I really, really loved it. I read it in 2 days and I gave it 5 stars. It has an average of 3.62. I see a 3-star, a 1 stars, and then several 5 stars. I think it's one of those books, I think you'll know a quarter of the way through this book if it's for you. It was for me. Loved it. 5 stars. And I now want to read more Mallory Pearson. Okay, The Storm by Rachel Hawkins. St. Medard's Bay, Alabama is famous for 3 things: the deadly hurricanes that regularly sweep into town, the Rosalie Inn, a century-old hotel that survived every one of those storms, and Lo Bailey, the local girl infamously accused of the murder of her lover, political scion Landon Fitzroy, during Hurricane Marie in 1984. When Geneva Corliss, the current owner of the Rosalie Inn, hears a writer is coming to town to research the crime that put St. Medard's Bay on the map, she's less interested in solving a whodunit than in how a successful true crime book might help the struggling inn's bottom line. But to her surprise, August Fletcher doesn't come to St. Medard's Bay alone. With him is none other than Lo Bailey herself. As the summer heats up and another monster storm begins twisting its way toward St. Medard's Bay, Geneva learns that some people can be just as destructive and as deadly as any hurricane, and that the truth of what happened to Landon Fitzroy may not be the only secret Lo is keeping. So, it's set on a beach in Alabama, not Florida, but close enough, and during hurricane season, and there's so much like hurricane culture. That was something that I could certainly relate to. There were a lot of flashbacks. I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed the mystery. All of the present tense story is told from the perspective of Geneva. And a lot of the flashbacks are written from other people's perspectives, some of the other characters in the story, and they're all timed during some of these other historic hurricanes that happened. So the chapter will be called Marie, or it'll be called Velma, or whatever the name of the hurricane was. And then you'll read about something that happened during that hurricane to these people. So I liked how it was organized by hurricane. And it's a great hook that while the mystery is being unraveled, a storm forms and is getting closer and closer to them, so it's ratcheting up the tension, and hurricane preparations are happening and all that. It was a really fun read. I had a really great time. Did not change my life, but I love stories about an old crime that was never solved, that becomes relevant again to the characters that we're following, where you start to find out the details about that crime, but also how it impacts and is relevant to what's happening now. It reminded me of the way I felt reading The Glass Forest by Cynthia Swanson. And so I love that trope, and I really enjoyed it here as well. I enjoyed the beach setting and all the hurricane stuff because we go through that all the time. In fact, right now, there is a tropical storm, Imelda, that has formed, that is like slowly heading closer to Florida. It's probably not going to hit us. But still, I can relate to that, so I enjoyed that as well. I felt disgusted by the behavior of the men in the story, which is just correct, because men will be that. And I liked the inn itself. I liked that so many important events in this book and in its history took place in that building. And I liked the cozy setting of this historic old building that survives all the storms, because it always seems like there are some buildings that just somehow magically get away with living through hurricane after hurricane, or they don't get hit by the tornado and their next door, building does. I like that. I like the lore of that. I might have enjoyed spending more time in some of the previous, old historical time periods, but it's a thriller, and so again, the pacing is really important, and the pacing was spot on. So, and I certainly didn't feel like the story was lacking as a result. I just would have enjoyed more historical stuff. But that's just my taste, and I'm glad that it was there in the first place. So it's basically it's not a negative to say that I would have enjoyed more of the stuff I loved, because it was there and I loved it. I sort of wished that we could have gotten to know the man who was murdered a little bit better, because we see him a little bit in flashback, but you don't. And I think maybe upon reflection that is actually appropriate, that he remained kind of enigmatic, because he was a public figure, and so it works. And maybe the fact that I wish that I could have gotten to know him better is a testament to the writing. This is my first Rachel Hawkins book that I've ever read, and it makes me want to read more. Again, it didn't change my life, but I didn't need it to. I had a great time, and I would enjoy having that experience again. Twisty mystery, if you like time jumps, if you're not afraid of time jumps and you enjoy a beach setting. So I gave it 4 stars. I have to change the battery now, so the camera might go bloop and move slightly, so don't get mad about that. Okay. Hopefully it didn't move too much. I need more chocolate, and I gotta go to Halloween Horror Nights. So yeah, I gave it 4 stars, and I don't know, sometimes I think maybe I went overboard and that book was just fine and I enjoyed it. I had a good time and liked it, and maybe it's really a 3-star or 3.5. Yeah, I've been giving 4 stars to a lot of things lately, but it doesn't bother me. I sort of feel like maybe that just means that I'm choosing the right books to read, and I'm having a good time, so 4 stars. Now there's one more book that I read, and this was not a plan that I had, but I decided to just go ahead and read it because I was ahead in my reading, and I thought, well, I want to keep reading, so I'm just going to add something that I've had on my TBR before and many, many times, years past, and that is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by none other than Shirley Jackson. So I've read The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, and I was completely entranced by her writing, especially the beginning of the book really wove a spell, it's like she's a witch. Like, her writing is just evocative of an atmosphere and a feeling, and feels right. So I finally read this book. This was her last novel, I believe. She passed away right after it was published, or soon after it was published. Oh, it's her masterpiece, Shirley Jackson's masterpiece, Living in the Blackwood Family Home. I have read this blurb so many times over the years, and it's exciting to think that now that I've read it and I'm doing this wrap-up, I don't have to read this again. Living in the Blackwood family home with only her sister Constance and Uncle Julian for company, Merricat just wants to... By the way, Merricat. M-E-R-R-I-C-A-T. It's a shortened, like a nickname for Mary Catherine. Every time I've read this blurb in the past, I've been like, wow, that's a crazy name. Living in the Blackwood family home with only her sister Constance and her Uncle Julian for company, Merricat just wants to preserve their delicate way of life. But ever since Constance was acquitted of murdering the rest of the family, the world isn't leaving the Blackwoods alone. And when cousin Charles arrives, armed with overtures of friendship and a desperate need to get into the safe, Merricat must do everything in her power to protect the remaining family. So yes, this is the story of it says she might be a lunatic, a very confused 18-year-old girl who reads more like, maybe a 12-year-old girl, because that's how old she was, I think, when the tragedy happened and most of the family died. So this girl has been just living with her sister, who indulges all of her unique magical world-building fantasies, so and is just like very easy on her. So she hasn't had a lot of structure and is a little bit disconnected from reality as a result. When you first meet her, she's going into town to buy, eggs and like flour and stuff. And it's like she has every day of the week all portioned out. Like, this day is like this and we do this. And then on Tuesdays we do this. She needs all of this structure. She sort of has created a system for herself in the absence of parents. Everybody in the town kind of hates this wealthy, weird family, where they think that her sister is a murderer, and they resent them up on their big castle up that they can see above the little village. And so they're really rude to this little girl. They kind of antagonize her. She's not a little girl, though. She's 18, and they keep thinking she was a little girl. But that's how she's written. So she protects the home. She wants to keep everybody out. She has this aristocratic family sense of, like, basically stay away from the normies. She buries things on their property. It's sort of like, this is a protection device. I will take this item that is significant because of something that happened today, and I will bury it next to the stream, and that will protect the house and keep people out. In her mind, there's like a logic to what she's burying and why. And sometimes it's like money. It's not rational, but it makes sense in her magic system that she's made up in her head, that she's kind of making up as she goes along. And her older sister has sort of indulged her in all of these fantasies and says, oh, silly Merricat. And Uncle Julian is very confused because I think it was arsenic poisoning. It didn't kill him, but he has brain damage, so he gets confused. So it's really just these two. And then this guy shows up and is obviously trying to woo his cousin, trying to get them to rejoin the world, and has Constance confused and sort of torn between them. Uncle Julian doesn't like him because he's basically slowly taking all of Uncle Julian's deceased brother Merricat's father's stuff and starting to wear it and treat it like it's his own stuff, like he's going to move in and sit at the head of the table and do all this stuff. And Merricat hates him immediately. The way she's written is really, really fun, where she's just like very matter of fact, like, I decided I should probably have him killed, but not on Tuesday, because on Tuesday we're doing this. Like, that's kind of her personality. So there's all this tension and all of these conflicts, and it's barreling towards this very inevitable negative climax. It's unsettling. The ending of this book is unsettling. This young woman is unwell, and yet you kind of understand her logic and you enjoy being in her mind. She's fun to read, man. I loved her. It was a crazy time. I enjoyed it a lot. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as The Haunting of Hill House, and for some people that's flip-flop the other way, but I really, really liked it. I would certainly reread it, and it's not a long read. And now I'm curious to see the movie, because there have been some adaptations. So that was a 4-star read as well. So yeah, so those are the books that I read in September. I think we can agree that I did a good job Thank you. Yes. I read a lot of books. I read the books that I was going to read, and I had a good time doing it, which is great. So now I'm trying to keep this momentum going, and what I need to do now is really pick up the pace on Night Shift by Stephen King, because I've read like 3 or 4 of the stories, and there are, I think, 11. So anyway, those are the books that I read in September. The average rating is really, really high. It's like 4 something, and I had a great time. So I'm proud of myself, and I'm glad that September went so well. I hope that October goes as well. Knock on wood. And so that's that. Thank you so much for watching. If you have read any of the books that I mentioned in this video, please let me know in the comments below what you thought of them. And until next time, I will be here in the dark reading.